The first mistake was believing that power only belonged to the people in suits, that it lived in corner offices and tailored blazers, in handshakes and business cards. Nobody ever stopped to question that. Nobody needed to, because the system had always confirmed it. But on that particular morning, outside Helix Corporate Towers, power wasn't wearing a suit. It was sitting quietly on a cold pavement, completely invisible to every single person who walked past. The city was already running at full speed. Engines roared, heels struck concrete, and the glass doors of Helix kept swinging open and shut like the building itself couldn't sit still. Everyone moving through that entrance looked like they had somewhere important to be, like the whole world was waiting on them. But right at the base of that tower, one man hadn't moved. His clothes had been worn down by time. His shoulders carried something heavy, the kind of weight that has nothing to do with what you're holding in your hands. In front of him, a small paper cup sat on the ground, nearly empty, trembling slightly every time someone walked too close. Not a single person stopped or looked twice or even slowed down. His name was Daniel Cole, but nobody out there knew that anymore. Years ago, Daniel Cole wasn't just connected to Helix Corporate Towers. He was part of the reason it existed. His decisions had shaped contracts worth millions. His vision had taken a struggling idea and turned it into something that now towered over the city skyline. But life has a way of rewriting a man's story without asking his permission. A tragedy hit, he withdrew, and the silence stretched on longer than anyone expected. Slowly, the world stopped looking for him, until eventually it stopped remembering him entirely. Now he was just another person people stepped over without a second thought. Inside the building, things were shifting. A new executive team was being introduced. Leadership was being restructured. Power was quietly changing hands behind glass walls and polished conference tables. And one of the names rising fastest through that structure was Vanessa Blake. She was exactly what the company rewarded: sharp, ambitious, and completely unforgiving. A woman who had built her career on the belief that weakness was a choice, and not one she was willing to tolerate. Vanessa stepped out of her black car that morning like she owned the pavement beneath her. Her heels hit the ground with authority. Her assistant scrambled to keep pace behind her. Her eyes swept the entrance and immediately narrowed. She didn't like what she saw. A man sitting too close to the doors, too visible, too inconvenient. Her expression shifted, not to concern, not even to curiosity, just pure, sharp irritation. She muttered something under her breath and kept walking, her annoyance sharpening with every step. The employees nearby felt the tension and instinctively gave her space. Then she spoke, loud enough for the people around her to hear, cold enough to cut right through the noise of the morning, and with one remark reduced a human being to something disposable. The man didn't react. He didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't even raise his voice. He just looked at her. And in that silence, there was something deeply unsettling. A stillness that didn't belong to a man who had supposedly lost everything. But Vanessa didn't notice that. She only saw what she came looking for, and that was her first mistake. Because before that day was over, the man she dismissed would become the reason her entire understanding of success, power, and respect came apart at the seams. Stories like this take hours to carefully craft and bring to life for you. If you enjoy immersive storytelling like this, consider subscribing so you never miss the next one. Inside Helix Corporate Towers, everything looked exactly the way it always did. Marble floors, ceiling lights, executives moving with purpose, conversations being had in hushed, important tones, millions of dollars changing direction in the time it took to send an email. Vanessa walked through the lobby like nothing from outside could touch her. She had her day mapped out already, but outside, Daniel Cole was still there. Security noticed him within the hour. At first, it was just glances. A few quiet complaints passed between staff. Then it got more direct. One guard walked over and asked him to move further from the entrance. Daniel moved without any argument, without making a scene. He simply got up and stepped further away. But that wasn't enough. Once people decide someone doesn't belong somewhere, compliance doesn't fix it. It just gives them the next reason. By midday, employees were visibly uncomfortable around him. Some avoided eye contact. Others picked up their pace as they passed, as if his presence might somehow slow them down. One junior staff member actually laughed under his breath and pointed him out to a colleague like he was something worth mocking. Then the photos started circulating, the murmurs picked up, and eventually complaints were filed through official channels. Inside the building, Vanessa sat through meetings, completely unaware of the situation unfolding just outside the glass, until she looked up and saw him, still there, through one of the lobby panels. The irritation came back instantly. She called a facilities manager and made her expectations very clear. She didn't want explanations. She wanted results. Within minutes, two security officers approached Daniel. This time they weren't asking. A small group of employees had gathered near the entrance, watching the whole thing play out. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. Nobody said a word. Daniel stood slowly, not resisting, just carrying the kind of exhaustion that runs deeper than the body. As he was walked across the street, a few people laughed softly. One shook their head like they just watched something obvious and overdue. And through all of it, not one person stepped in, asked who he was, or stopped to wonder why he remained so calm. Think about that for a second. Have you ever watched someone get treated badly in public and said nothing? Most people have. It's easier to look away than it is to step in. Across the street, Daniel sat down on a bench in a small park. The city noise faded a little, but not enough to erase what had just happened. And yet his expression didn't break, because pain wasn't new to him. What was new, what still caught him off guard, was how effortlessly people erased other people, without guilt or hesitation, like it was just a decision made in passing. Sitting there, memories surfaced, not of poverty or failure, but of boardrooms where his voice carried weight, of signatures that built empires, of the early days at Helix when loyalty still meant something. But loyalty, it seemed, had an expiration date. Back inside the tower, Vanessa moved through her afternoon completely unbothered. As far as she was concerned, the problem had been handled. But Daniel Cole was still out there, watching and thinking, and waiting. The longer Daniel sat alone on that bench, the heavier the silence became. Not because the park was quiet, but because silence has a way of forcing you to sit with things you'd rather keep moving past. There was a time when Daniel walked into a room and the energy shifted. People stood up. Conversations paused. His opinion could redirect million-dollar decisions before anyone had even opened a laptop. That wasn't ego. It was just reality. A reality that had belonged to him for years. But grief doesn't care about what you built. It doesn't make exceptions for momentum, or identity, or the empire you helped create. When his wife died, something in Daniel stopped responding to the world the way it used to. Meetings became noise he couldn't follow. Success felt like a language he'd forgotten how to speak, and the ambition that had driven him for decades just went quiet. And while he stepped away to try to find himself again, the world he helped build kept moving. It adapted, it replaced, and eventually it forgot. Now he sat outside that same building, staring at it like a stranger. The irony wasn't lost on him. Inside, people were celebrating progress, talking about growth and legacy and vision, and outside, the man who had laid the foundation for all of it was being told he didn't belong on the pavement. What would you do if someone you loved was treated that way? If it was your father or mother sitting on that bench and the people inside that building were laughing? Would you say something? Or would it be easier to pretend you didn't see it? Daniel lowered his gaze, not in defeat, but in thought. Something was shifting inside him. Not anger. He'd moved past that a long time ago. Not revenge. That had never been his style. What he felt was clarity, a kind of quiet, deliberate understanding. He knew now with certainty that respect had never really been about position. It was about recognition. And recognition had been quietly stripped from him, piece, by people who never once thought to ask who he actually was. Then his phone vibrated with a message. Short, direct, no extra words. The board meeting was confirmed for later that afternoon. A meeting about leadership restructuring. A meeting where names would be chosen and removed. Daniel stood from the bench. For the first time that day, his posture changed. Not because he was becoming someone new, but because the world was about to remember who he had always been. The car pulled up quietly, drawing no attention, just a vehicle arriving exactly when it was supposed to. Daniel stepped in without hesitation. The interior was a different world from the bench he'd just left. The driver greeted him with calm, practiced respect and handed him a garment bag that had been placed carefully on the seat. Inside was a suit, not just any suit, tailored, precise, the kind that doesn't just cover a man but restores him, the kind of clothing that says something before a word is spoken. As Daniel changed, something subtle happened. His posture straightened on its own. The heaviness that had defined him all morning began to lift. Not because anything had been fixed yet, but because he was no longer being seen through the wrong lens. Across the city, Helix Corporate Towers continued without pause. Meetings on schedule, calls being made, decisions moving forward as if nothing had shifted. Vanessa prepared for the afternoon briefing, reviewing performance reports with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been seriously challenged. She spoke about leadership expectations, about professional conduct, about the image the company was committed to projecting. The irony, of course, was that she used the exact same values she had ignored completely that morning. Meanwhile, Daniel arrived at a private location connected directly to Helix's internal board structure, a place most employees didn't know existed, a place where the real decisions were made. When he stepped out of the car, the atmosphere changed immediately. No questions, no confusion, just quiet and immediate recognition from the people who already knew the truth. Back inside Helix, Vanessa's phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. It simply said, "Emergency board attendance was required." No explanation, no agenda, just a time and the clear expectation that she would be there. She frowned slightly and adjusted her blazer. Something felt off. She couldn't explain what, just a low, subtle unease that hadn't been there an hour ago. The boardroom had a particular kind of silence when Vanessa walked in. Not the silence of a room waiting to begin, the silence of a room that already knew something she didn't. She took her seat. Senior executives sat around the table, expressions unreadable. Not cold, just careful. She noticed immediately that not everyone was talking. Not everyone was relaxed. Something was being held back, and she couldn't figure out what. Then the door opened again, and Daniel Cole walked in. Not the man she'd seen that morning. Not the figure on the pavement with the worn clothes and the paper cup. This was someone else entirely, composed, impeccable, carrying himself with the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself. The room shifted the moment he entered. Whispers moved around the table like a current. Vanessa's eyes followed him. Something about him was familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place. Then it started to settle in, slowly, uncomfortably. One of the senior board members spoke. Daniel Cole was not just a former employee, not just a name in the company's early history. He was one of the original founders of Helix Corporate Towers, and he was still a major shareholder. Today's meeting wasn't ceremonial. A full review of leadership conduct had been initiated, based on internal reports filed over recent weeks. And among the incidents under review were ones that had occurred that very morning. Security footage was pulled up on the screen. Everything was there on that screen. Her voice, her words, her tone, her expression, all of it played back in silence, in front of every person in that room. Vanessa's face drained of color. This wasn't a misunderstanding or someone's interpretation of events. It was documentation, clear and time-stamped and undeniable. She tried to speak, but her voice didn't carry the same certainty it had at the start of the day. Around the table, executives exchanged looks. The man she had dismissed without a second thought had been watching everything. Not as a victim, not as someone powerless, but as the person with actual authority over what happened next. When Daniel finally spoke, it was calmly. No raised voice, no sharpness, no performance. Just facts delivered with the quiet weight of someone who has nothing left to prove. Vanessa tried to explain herself. She tried to describe what she thought she was seeing that morning, what she believed she was dealing with, but nothing she said could change what was already on record. The humiliation she had handed out so freely that morning was now sitting in the room with her, and it wasn't going anywhere. Her career didn't end with a confrontation. It didn't end with shouting or a dramatic exit. It ended quietly, the way most things do, with truth, with documentation, and with a room full of people who had seen everything. As she was escorted out for formal review, one thought landed that she hadn't made space for before. Status can change in seconds, but dignity you throw away through arrogance, takes a very long time to rebuild. By the time the day wound down, Helix Corporate Towers felt different. Not the building. The building was exactly the same. The marble floors, the lights, the revolving doors, all of it unchanged. What had changed was the air inside it. Daniel stood near the window, looking out over the city he had spent decades helping to shape. There was no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction at how things had unfolded, just quiet reflection. Because for him, this was never about Vanessa specifically. Her actions had consequences. They needed to. But the deeper lesson wasn't about one person being punished. It was about something that runs much wider than that. It's about how easily people confuse appearance with truth. How quickly respect evaporates the moment compassion leaves the room. How the version of someone we decide on in the first 3 seconds of seeing them, based on nothing more than what they're wearing, where they're sitting, what they look like, can be completely entirely wrong. Somewhere below, the city was still moving at full speed. People rushing, judging, assuming, the same way they always had. But something had been placed back into the system today. A reminder that power is rarely as simple as it looks. That the person you dismiss on the way in might be the same person deciding your future on the way out. The people we underestimate have a way of outlasting us. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they're exactly the ones who change everything. If this story stayed with you, then you already know why you should subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and the next one might hit even harder. We'll see you there.